Howdy, it's Mr. Pete, your YouTube shop teacher, and today, with a rather mundane lesson, strictly talking, I'm making no chips, and I'm covering the JACOBS taper. Just exactly what is a JACOBS taper? A JACOBS taper is the short taper that's on the end of an arbor or a shank into which the chuck will be fastened. Now these are self-holding tapers, the same as a Morse taper is a self-holding taper. Let me back up and talk just a little bit about Morse tapers first. Most all of you that have been around a shop are familiar with a Morse taper, and there are 8 of them in all. They start with a number 0, and this is a number 1, 2, 3, and a number 4, and they go up to number 7. Very seldom will we go any larger than this in a regular shop, and I don't even go any larger than a number 4. When I talk about self-holding tapers, what I mean is that the taper can be put into the machine spindle, tailstock, or whatever it is, and it will hold strictly by friction, but in larger diameter drills it will slip, and we use a tang to prevent that. On some machines or in some applications, there is a threaded hole in the end of some Morse taper tools, and a drawbar is used to hold them in place. But they are self-holding, as the JACOBS taper is, as opposed to steeper tapers such as this number 30 milling machine taper that is not self-holding. That is, without a drawbar, it would fall out of its corresponding taper. So what is a JACOBS taper? First of all, I think everyone knows what a JACOBS drill chuck is. It's just a big company that's made drill chucks for many, many years. It's probably the dominant chuck company, certainly in the United States, maybe the whole world, I don't know. But these are standardized tapers, and it's the short taper. Again, they're self-holding, and the purpose is that they can be installed into the chuck. For instance, this is a number 2. It would be driven in and pretty much stay there for life. There's very little likelihood of them coming out. And there's many different sizes of chucks, and of course there's going to be many different sizes of the Morse tapers. So you can get just about any combination of arbor that you want with a Morse taper or other taper on one end, and then it might even be an R8 taper, and the ubiquitous JACOBS taper on the other end. There are 9 different JACOBS tapers. That is 9 different sizes. I'm going to show you a chart in just a second, but I do have some samples here. I do not have all of them. But this is the smallest, and you can't really see it here. This is a real small chuck, and that is indeed a number 0 Morse taper. Well, why am I even covering this subject? Because in the following video, I'm going to remove this little chuck and install it on one of my little Cameron drill presses. So I'm really leading up to that. But continuing here, that's a number 0, very small. This is a number 1 with the number 2 Morse taper. There's a number 2 with a number 2 Morse taper. There's a number 33, which is a very popular one, and you're going to find that on many, many drill presses. There's another number 33, only with the number 1 Morse taper. Here's a number 3. Here's another number 3, but on a very large arbor, and you can see that's all chewed up and ruined. It must have spun loose, which is really rather unusual. That's a number 4 Morse taper. And then finally here, although I'm not going to take this off, this is a German chuck, Ram, which is also a pretty popular brand. And number 2 Morse taper here. But if you can see here, this is a number 4 JACOBS taper, which is one of the larger ones. Now let me show you the table. You can find all the information you need on Morse tapers in your machinery handbook, and in this wonderful little black book. But you know, these are copyrighted, so I'm very hesitant to zero in and show you that. I'm going to show you that information in another way here in just a moment. This is a page out of the JACOBS catalog, quite an old one, but you can find this information on their website as well. A little description there also on what a JACOBS taper is, and then here are all the tapers with the different sizes. I'm not crazy about this chart because it's kind of confusing. They have the information both in inch and metric, which doesn't mean much to a lot of you. So I'm going to show you a chart from Little Machine Shop Company that I think is better than this. So if you want to go onto the website for JACOBS, if you're interested in this, you can look this all up, because some of you may be wanting to identify your JACOBS tapers. In order to identify your taper, in some cases it will be stamped right here on the chuck. But I noticed it sure isn't very consistent, and most of them are not marked as such. Remember that the rigid Supreme chucks are also a quality American-made one, and they also use the JACOBS taper because it's pretty well standardized. Also, on some of the Arbors you will find, this is a genuine JACOBS, and it is marked someplace here, yeah, number 33. And a number 2 Morse Taper. So you might be able to find that, but in most cases not. You're going to have to measure it unless you've got a very good eye. Here's a number 2A chuck still in the box. And the mount is a number 2 JACOBS taper. But it is not marked. Yes, it is. It is marked. Some JACOBS chucks are threaded, as you know. Usually they're used on portable drills, electric drills, but not always. But more than likely, if you need to get a shank for that, for instance, here's one that is also threaded, and it's a number 2. So there's a wide variety of these Arbors available in any machine shop catalog such as KBC. Here's an older Arbor still in the box, and it's clearly marked on the end, and it's a number 2 Morse taper for JACOBS Chuck Series number 3. There's a brand new Arbor, and it's also marked right here. If you buy one that's an import, it's probably going to be marked like this: Morse taper number 3, JACOBS taper number 3. And they're not very expensive. That's probably only a $10 or $12 item. Most of you are probably familiar with littlemachineshop.com, and you can go onto their website, and they have a paper catalog as well, and pretty reasonable prices. I do not think they will object to me showing this, because I did get this off the internet and printed it out. But this is a nice chart here for the JACOBS taper, because it again shows the different sizes from 0 to number 6 plus the number 33, and there are dimensions if you need to identify one. There's the large end, the small end, the length of it, and then it tells the taper per foot. Now they are not all the same in taper per foot, but again, neither are Morse tapers. Also, it tells you the angle, and the JACOBS chart does not show you the angle. Not that it matters to you, but these small angles here, 2, 3, 4 degrees, are self-holding. I don't know what angle it is where all of a sudden it would not be self-holding, but this is an interesting chart, and you can use this, again, to identify your tapers should you need to. For instance, if we didn't know what this taper was, we can take our caliper and measure it near the small end, and I'm getting 334 for the small end. Well, there we are. It's a number 1. And I could also double check it here on the larger end, and it's about 377. A little bit of difference there, 5,000, depending on where the caliper is on the taper, because it's going to vary greatly, of course. As far as the length of it, we can check that too, but I don't think that's necessary. It's just pretty easy here to determine that this is a number 1 JACOBS taper. Let me explain to you what prompted me to make this video. I came across this JACOBS chuck some time ago, and it's brand new. You can still see packing grease on it, but I needed an arbor, and it's not marked as such as to what this taper is. So I went through my different arbors here, and you can see that a 33 doesn't fit, and a number 3 is too big. So I came up with the idea, well, no big idea really, but I checked it here with the calipers, and on the large end it's approximately 665. So looking at the chart here, you can see that it's a number 6. And I did check the depth. It's a little hard to check the smaller diameter, but that's a number 6. So I will order an arbor. And that's the entire reason I did this video. I would like to order an arbor for this. Remember, it's a number 6 JACOBS taper, and I believe I'll get it in a number 2 Morse taper. So in the KBC catalog, you see that there's an entire page devoted to arbors for chucks. So let me zero in on what I'm going to order. And there it is highlighted, number 2 Morse taper to a number 6 JACOBS taper. And how can that only be $3.90? I might as well order a dozen. Or I could buy the genuine JACOBS, but look at the difference in price. It's $24 if I get the genuine. I believe maybe the JACOBS is hardened and the imports are not. Here I am over at the drill press now to talk just a little bit about this. There was a video that I made some time ago, and here it is. It's tips number 384 on how to remove a JACOBS chuck from this type of spindle, because this chuck, again, even though it's a number 33, has that threaded collar on there. I don't believe they make them that way anymore, but you're going to find plenty of old drill presses around that have that taper. And even though the number 33 is a self-holding taper, they put that threaded collar on there to make darn sure it wasn't going to come off. I'm over at the Bridgeport mill to show you just a couple things. I'm getting a little sidetracked, but here's a big JACOBS chuck with an R8 shank on it that will fit right into the Bridgeport spindle. And this one is marked right here on the arbor as a number 3 JACOBS taper. Well, the thing I really wanted to show you here is that there are still people that insist on using a drill chuck and a milling machine along with an end mill, and that is not correct. You need to hold your end mills right in collets, because what happens here is as you feed into your work, you're putting side pressure on the little JACOBS taper, and there's a good chance that these will come loose and go rolling across the floor. So same thing goes if you're on a drill press and you're using a sanding drum or something like that. They can come off, but that, I think, is why they equipped a lot of the older drill presses with that threaded collar, because it would prevent them from coming off. But a word to the wise on that. There may be times when you wish to remove the arbor from the chuck, and how can we do that? Well, there's about 3 different ways. Number 1 is to drive it off. And looking at this picture from JACOBS, you notice that very seldom does this hole go all the way through. In other words, it's a blind hole. Where's my flashlight? So what you can do from this side is to drill that out, and there'll be a little space in there you'll feel when you break through, and then you can drive it out with a punch. The other way is to drill a hole and drive a pin through the shank, the arbor rather, and then use the wedges. This is the correct way to use wedges, but if there is no shoulder, like there isn't right here, to drill a hole, drive a pin through there, then the wedges can be used and will grip between the chuck and the pin. Let's take a look at those wedges now. There's a close-up view of what the wedges look like. As old as the Egyptians, or older. Jacobs and other companies make wedges, and here are the three different sizes. That's number 1 size, there's the number 2 size, and the number 3 size. And they're about $15 a pair. Now regarding the real small number 0 taper, in the next video I'm going to make a set of wedges to remove that, so that'll be part of that video. If you want to order wedges, here they are in the Jacobs catalog. You'll also see a page like this in any other supply catalog. But notice that they offer 4 different wedges. I have a number 2, 3, and 6. The number 1 fits a number 1 Jacobs taper, but remember in the following video I need to remove a number 0 Jacobs taper. The thing is that Jacobs tells you what taper it can be used on, but they really do not give you any of the dimensions of the wedges. That's why I have 3 sets of them, because I would order a set and it wouldn't fit, and then I would order the other set. It was all by trial and error. So I'm going to do something here that no one has ever done on YouTube. And what has no one ever done on YouTube? And that's to give you the dimensions of the wedges. So here's the number 1, and that's 465 thousandths. The number 2 is 588 thousandths, and the number 3 847, and those are approximate. I hope that helps someone. I could have used that information a long time ago. So one would have to determine what size wedges to use. Well, the number 1s don't fit in. The number 3 is way too big. But the number 2, it's just right. And you use one up against the other. I'm not going to remove this. And you can see this one's already been pretty well dinged up. It might help to put just a little grease on that, on those 2 surfaces, and then fit them up like this. Now you can squeeze them in a vise, but I've found that doesn't work real well. It needs the shock, because some of them have been in there for 50 years. So if you would lay this on an anvil and use a brass or copper hammer, it's going to come off, but I don't guarantee it. It can be very difficult, so don't damage the chuck, and make sure you hang on to the chuck. And then this piece is probably going to go flying unless you got somebody to help you hold this end, and I don't recommend that if you're wielding a huge hammer. But that is how to remove them, and I think you can understand now, if there was no shoulder there, that you would drill a hole and drive a pin, and that would give some purchase for the wedges. Back to this big old ROM chuck here. If we wanted to remove that, you can see that there is no shoulder. This is the taper right here. So in using the larger ones, well, even that's not large enough to go on there. You might have to grind it out, because I don't believe they make a bigger size than the number 3. But since there would be no shoulder, that's where you would have to drill a hole, a cross hole, and drive probably a hardened pin in there to get it out. But probably a better alternative on this would be, and you can see that's a blind hole, would be to probably put this in the lathe and drill as large a hole as you could in there. And you'll again feel it break loose or break through, and then use a good punch and straddle this over a vise or the anvil or something and drive it out, but it may not be easy. How do you reassemble an arbor onto a chuck? Because I did remove this one earlier just for the purposes of instruction. Well, I cleaned the Jacob taper real well as the hole, and be sure and back the jaws out of the way. In other words, we don't want to drive it on with the jaws sticking out. You could damage it. Like that. This is a lead plate. We know that won't make a mess. Yeah, again, they're nice and clean. Copper hammer. And that won't come off. Make sure there's no chips in there. I said earlier I wasn't going to remove an arbor, but I think I will, so you see how it's done. And this is one that will come off easily because I had it off before. This is the one that I drove home and installed a few minutes ago, so that will require the number 2 wedges. They go in like this. Bring them together, and then on an anvil or some real good surface, I'm just going to strike it with the copper hammer. Now, if it's been on there for years, this may really go flying. Take one of your wife's washcloths and lay it there when you hit it, if you don't have somebody around to help you, and tap it off. Now, I'm going to take this off. Just lay it here. We'll see how far it goes, but I want you to see what happens. And it didn't go flying because it wasn't really on there that tight. But that's all there is to doing that if you have the right tools. And let's put it right back on. That concludes this video on the JACOBS taper. Hope you liked it. Hope you found it useful in your machine shop. Be sure and watch the following video where I will talk about that little number 0 taper, and I will remove this hopefully and install it on my Cameron drill press. So this is tubalcain saying so long for now.